So this is the Cayin HA3A, and we just opened this up, and I got a good listen to it in the last few days. And you know, I'll be doing another video comparison to the 6A and the 300B amp to kind of give you an idea of the differences of all three. But the first thing off the bat is that these amps, you know, even though I don't think one is innately just good, better, best, they're all great amps in their own right. You know, they have the most power with the 300B, little less power with the 6A, which is the KT88 EL34 amp, and then the 6V6 amp here has the least amount of power. And in that order, I would say, you know, as far as noise is concerned, and I'm not talking about like hum or anything about that, but just the background of how much power the amp puts out, the 6V6 amp is the quietest for like really sensitive headphones. Whereas like you definitely want this power in the 300B if you're like listening to planar headphones or something that's hard to drive. If you're using a headphone that's pretty sensitive, and by pretty sensitive I mean like over 100 dB per milliwatt or anything like that, this amp is definitely going to be the quietest for that. Whereas not that these aren't quiet, you know, when you're listening to music, you're not going to hear any noise or anything like that. But I think, you know, if you're worried about using like IEMs or, you know, really sensitive headphones, this amp actually has an advantage over these two, just in that these 300B and KT88 tubes put out so much power that, you know, you're going to be struggling with that. All the amps, you know, this has the same features on the front panel here, where you have a standard jack, the 4.4 jack, and the XLR. And you know, the 4.4 does have a resistor in line with it, so it actually is quieter because they have that resistor in line with it if you're trying to use a really, really sensitive headphone. As far as tube swapping too, one quick note is that the 6V6 amp here, the 3A, has less rectifiers to change out, and it has 2 of the 12AU7 tubes and then 2 of the 6V6s. As far as tube swapping goes, 6V6s are definitely not that expensive. You know, I was able to go to Langrex and get these fiver. I've never had fiver tubes before, and I think a pair of these ran me under $100 or maybe somewhere around that, which for fiver tubes, if you know the tube world, those are usually really expensive. Same thing with 12AU7s. These are, you know, these Baldwins that we have, they're not that bad if you can find them. 12AU7s typically are less than 12AX7 variants. First impression sound-wise with the HA3K is just kind of how delicate the sound is. And by delicate, I use that kind of like delicate, nimble word to kind of describe when I'm able to hear kind of a separation of content, but still with kind of a euphony or tactile feel to the mids, where the mids feel really lifelike and like they have a little decay to them. It makes the mids very lifelike, very quiet and separated from the background. And I think that's kind of the defining characteristic of the 6V6 tube. Whereas, you know, 300B amp or KT88 amp might have more girth and power. This one doesn't, you know, it doesn't quite have the weight, but it has kind of a cleanliness and nimbleness to the mids, which is just really, really nice without giving up, you know, too much weight or anything like that. You know, one quick note on the knob, it doesn't have the steps like the 6A or the 300B. It has both VU meters, which will go up and down as music plays. And it also has, you know, these transformers in the back, which do kind of get nice and warm as the amp plays on. One really surprising thing about the sonics of the HA3 amp so far is just that, you know, with the amp being smaller than the other ones, I was a little worried, like, is there going to be bass presence, weight, punch, girth, all those things that you want out of a tight sounding tube amp. And just with the transformer based amp, I mean, I had some Glass Animals playing, and you know, it really grips the driver really well, shockingly well, honestly. I was able to really feel the bass and have it feel resounding and tight and not giving up too much decay, whereas, you know, almost sometimes, you know, the 300B amp punches so hard that I'm not, you know, it kind of overtakes some other things. This amp, it really has a very even top to bottom feel, but then when tracks call for it, the bass can really take hold, or you can get that really nice delicate treble extension. And if you're the kind of person who's looking for a more kind of neutral sound, but with that mid-range euphony from a tube amp, honestly, the 6V6 is probably closer to that than maybe the other Cayin amps. And that's what's really cool about the HA3A and the Cayin lineup, is each one of these amps has a little bit of something to offer, and the HA3A has that clean sound, has the cheaper tubes, and also, you know, is really easy to get along with in size and where you put it on your table. One note on tube amps is that you're gonna want to make sure that you have an outlet that isn't plugged into a bunch of other stuff like refrigerators or anything like that, or your Wi-Fi, and you're gonna wanna make sure that stuff's away. If you do get noise with your tube amp, try different outlets in the house. You know, one thing you always kind of wanna make sure is the voltage of your outlet is usually below the voltage of the transformer. Usually these transformers are 115 volts or 120 volts. You can get voltage modifiers on probably eBay or Amazon or other places to make sure that your voltage is below that mark. So just something to watch out for. And as always, if you get one of these amps and you have issues with noise, send us an email. You know, my main recommendation is usually to get one of those monster HTS power strips. I really like those. They have a filter in them to cut noise out if you can't figure it out off the bat, or to get one of those voltage modifiers. But remember, you know, tube amps, part of the joy of them is kind of the finickiness of them, where you're able to change tubes. They have that euphony to them. They are, you know, innately noisier than solid state amps, but when running well, it's not going to get in the way of the music. It's not going to be annoying or anything like that. It's just kind of part of owning a tube amp, is that, you know, the background may be not quite as black as a really clean, quiet, solid state amp.